Hello, this is Dr. Mercola. Today I'm joined by Randy Hartnell, who is the founder, president of the Vital Choice Wild Seafood and Organics. As a Northwest Washington native, he spent more than 20 years commercially fishing wild, pristine Alaskan waters for salmon, herring, and other regional species before he and his wife formed his company, Vital Choice, in 2001, which features sustainably harvested wild salmon, and that's what we're really going to be focusing a big portion of our talk on today, especially in light of some of the movies that have just recently been released, such as End of the Line, which I'm sure we can talk about. So thank you and welcome for joining us, Randy.
Thank you, Dr. Mercola. I really appreciate the opportunity to help educate your community about this really important subject.
So I'm wondering if you can give us some background on what led you to concentrate on organic foods and ultimately in creating your business, Vital Choice Wild Seafood and Organics.
Sure. I spent over 20 years as a wild salmon fisherman and other species, as you mentioned. I loved it. It was a fantastic lifestyle. I'd still be doing it, except that there was a big upheaval in our industry about 10 years ago.
Which is right about when you formed your company.
Yes. Actually, it was sort of opportunity always knocks at the back door, or often knocks at the back door. Farm salmon exploded onto world markets. Farm salmon was cheaper, it was available year-round, and for the most part consumers didn't really understand the difference between wild and farm salmon, and so in the short space of just a couple of years, maybe 5 years, world markets shifted from wild salmon to farm salmon. Every grocery store, every restaurant in America and beyond switched to farm salmon. And that basically pulled the rug out from under the wild salmon industry. And I tried to hold on for 2 or 3 years, but it got to the point where our price just kept falling and basically couldn't make a living at it anymore. So I myself and a lot of other family fishermen that have been doing that for years had to find something else to do.
Was your business a generational business, like your father and grandfather had done it?
No, I was a first generation fisherman. I went to college, was going to go to law school, and started fishing in Alaska to make my way through school, pay for tuition, and just fell in love with it.
Okay. And you were born in Washington, state of Washington?
Yes.
And then just moved up there?
That's right. Just went up there in the summers.
Okay.
And did it all through college, and when it was time to go to law school, I said, this is fantastic, you're out in nature, it's beautiful, you're harvesting food for people, which had sort of a primal, it was just really an appealing way for me to make a living. So,
sure.
But along came farm salmon, bottom fell out of our market. We ended up at the end of the season, we'd have a lot of fish caught because it's an abundant, sustainable resource, some of the healthiest food on the planet, yet nobody wanted it. And so I basically kind of reeled, it was sort of like a depression in our industry. Here I had what amounted to a PhD in catching fish, and it was absolutely worthless. So what are we going to do? Out of frustration, I went out with a friend, and we just started traveling around the country. We'd go to stores like Whole Foods, Wild Oats. We'd set up our grill out in front. We'd barbecue our wild salmon, and we'd tell the story, why wild is better than farmed. And people were very receptive. And often we would hear, well, this is great, but they hardly ever have it here. Where can I get it? And over again, I'd have to tell them, I'm sorry, I don't know. And one day a light bulb went off, and I said, I can send it to you. I'll send you some. And one thing led to another. I was aware of Omaha Steaks and how they were shipping red meat that you can buy in any grocery store in the country to people. And
more for less a convenience because
yes.
They don't really offer any other premium.
No, it's not anything special, but what we had was special. You couldn't find it other places. It was truly superior to the alternative, and that's how we got started.
Excellent. So can you, for our viewers who aren't quite familiar with the differences between farmed and wild salmon, can you explain the difference?
Sure. It would take probably an hour to tell you all the differences, but I'll summarize. Basically 3 big differences. There's the nutritional difference. Wild salmon are out eating what they've been programmed to eat for millennia. Marine organisms, they have a nutrient profile that is unmatched, unsurpassed. The full scale, the full
full range
of micronutrients. the fats, the minerals, the vitamins, the micronutrients. Farm salmon, on the other hand, are fed an artificial diet with artificial coloring, everything that goes into it. There's a lot of grain products that go into the farm salmon diet, corn, soy, a lot of which is, if not all, is genetically modified. They're fed feather meal, chicken meal. I mean, it's basically like any other industrially raised protein. So nutritionally, just like us, you are what you eat, and a salmon is what he eats. So when you're eating that farm salmon, you're getting a lot of things that salmon aren't supposed to eat. Mother Nature never intended them to eat that, and that's what you're putting in your body. And so it tastes different. The fat ratio is remarkably different. There are way more omega-6s in farm salmon because they're fed this grain-based diet. And that's a whole other subject, the omega-3s, omega-6s. But
Sure.
So the nutritional difference is quite vast. The environmental difference. Wild salmon are basically out there living as nature intended. They come back. You don't have to do anything. You just take care of their habitat, and they'll keep coming back every year. This year in Bristol Bay alone, one area.
Where is Bristol Bay?
Bristol Bay is just above the Panhandle in Alaska, western Alaska.
Mm-hmm.
It's the biggest wild sockeye salmon run in the world.
Mm-hmm.
This year alone, 30 million sockeye came back. And we'll get into the management of that fishery
Mm-hmm.
later, but basically those 30 million sockeye that came back, finest food on the planet. If you figure you get maybe 10 meals out of each fish, that's 300 million meals. Incredible meals that you're, brain building, heart protecting meals that you're getting out of those.
But then you wouldn't have a future if you took all of the 30 million.
No, that's the surplus.
Well, that's a surplus.
That's the surplus beyond. I'd love to talk to you more about the
Sure.
management system. We can do that later. But so 300 million meals come back every year just by letting those fish go out of the ocean range.
Wow.
And so it's tremendous. That's just one major fishery in Alaska. Farm salmon, on the other hand, are put in pens.
Mm-hmm.
They swim around closely compacted pens. Probably 99% of the farm salmon that are raised in net pens in the open ocean. And so all the excess food that goes in ends up going out into the environment. All the pesticides, all the antibiotics, anything that they don't eat, all their waste goes into the environment. And so this is one reason that there are many other problems.
Mm-hmm.
I just like to make a plug for a website that goes into all of this in a lot more detail. I would recommend to your viewers. It's called farmanddangerous.org.
Farm and Dangerous. No hyphens, just all one word.
Yes, and it goes into all the details there. But don't take it from me.
Sure.
You go to any credible environmental organization, pick one. There are probably 30 now that focus on ocean sustainability, and I believe pretty much every one of them will tell you that wild salmon from Alaska is a super green, best choice. You want to choose that. Farm salmon is in the red category, avoid. Okay. And these are some of the reasons. So nutritionally, environmentally, big differences between wild and farm salmon. And there's the other thing, and I run across this when I've talked to vegetarians or vegans. They're concerned about the ethical aspect.
Big issue.
It is a big issue, and I've actually converted quite a few of them by explaining to them that these wild sockeye salmon, which is our signature product, are sort of the vegetarians of the salmon world. They go out, they eat krill, plankton, algae, and they come back, and we catch them just as they're going off at the last stage of their life. So they're allowed to live, unlike any other industrially raised protein, they're allowed to live 95% of their life as nature intended. That last 5% is spent fighting their way up the river to spawn, where they will die naturally if they're not eaten by a bear or something else, or caught.
Okay, so that's why these are the surplus, because they're going to reproduce and they're not going back to the ocean.
That's right.
They're just going to die there.
Well,
so if no one harvests them, they're just going to be wasted.
It's fascinating. As I said, I fished in Alaska for over 20 years, so I'm intimately familiar with the management. The thing about Alaska is it actually got statehood in part to take control of the fisheries, this vast fishery resource, back from the federal government that was totally mismanaging it. Got statehood. They built right into their constitution language that would ensure that their resources, their fisheries resources, would be managed on a sustainable yield basis. What that means is that the fish are completely, the harvest of the fish is completely isolated from the market. So no matter how much people want to pay for salmon, it's not going to have any impact on how many salmon are caught. What dictates how many salmon are caught is every river has a scientist, a biologist, and he knows that river intimately. He knows what spawning habitat there is, what's the optimum amount of salmon to get into that spawning habitat, and that sets an escapement goal. So each year, the river that I used to fish was a river called the Igigik River, and they had an escapement goal every year of 2 million fish. So when those fish started coming back in late June, early July, the biologists would monitor it. I mean, they've got planes in the air spotting fish. They've got college interns that come up and sit in towers and they'll count fish in the river. So they're monitoring the amount of fish that come back. And when they could tell, you know, after years of watching the runs come back, you know, if we've got this many early in the season, we know we've got a big run coming. Anyway, what they do is they'll open it for 12 hours and they say, okay, you can go fishing. If they're getting enough number of fish they want, they'll continue to give you these window openings, all the while letting fish go past. And at such point that they get their 2 million or 1 million or whatever it is, 5 million fish, then everything else is surplus. And the thing is that if, I remember in one year we had 20 million fish come back to Igigik, and they only wanted 2 million. Mm-hmm. So those are
in some ways
surplus.
it's one of the principles that nature has is providing an overabundance of the seed to reproduce themselves.
Exactly.
It's like a pollinating flowers. I mean, they produce far more seeds than is necessary to sustain the species, but just as survival mechanism.
Yeah, it's, you know, we read these headlines about how all our fish are going to be gone in no time, but the wonderful thing about our business is the more you know about it, the closer you look at it, the better it looks. It's a fantastic story. Alaska Fisheries Management is a model for the world. And you can look at their halibut, their sablefish. Basically, they've set up these fisheries management regimens to ensure that the sustainability is the priority, not the market. So
continuing along the management thing, there was a video that was released, a film called The End of the Line. And I'm wondering, and obviously you're quite familiar with it because it's in your industry, and I'm wondering if you could sort of summarize the film succinctly and then maybe rebut or rebuttal some of the arguments that they make in the film to give people a little more confidence that, you know, one of the facts that stood out to me after watching it is that they had some pretty respected researchers suggesting that the way that we're going through currently managing the fish population, there's not going to be any fish left to eat in about 30 years. So, or somewhere in that time frame. So I'm wondering if you could summarize the film and maybe provide the arguments that support, well, just comment on it would be good.
You know, it's been a while since I watched the film, and I watched several, and so I don't remember the specifics other than, you know, we need to be concerned about the oceans. We definitely are putting more of a burden on them than throughout human history. And you know, the oceans are 71% of our planet. So a quote by somebody recently said, yeah, they're 71% of our planet, but we have 100% of the responsibility for taking care of them. And we haven't taken very good care of them. And of course, our fisheries resources are important. They feed millions and millions of people, and so we've got to start taking this seriously. Well,
it seemed that the crux, one of the points of the film is that there's these biologists and environmentalists who are really concerned about this issue. They have some pretty solid science. They know how to do the management, but then they get overruled by the commercial and the corporate and the country's interest in finances.
I think
and
what
so
I would
skew and override their recommendations.
Well, like so many things, I think we can generalize, and I think that film is guilty of that a little bit, because, as I said, there are pockets that are really being done well. There are areas in Japan and China where aquaculture is taking off. It's highly successful. Aquaculture feeds half the planet now, provides half the seafood on the
How does
planet now.
aquaculture differ from farm fishing?
It's the same thing.
Okay.
It's just different term. You have
Because, I mean, you were really, and I'm not suggesting that the disparagement of farm fishing is
well,
unwarranted.
let me get into that a little
Okay.
bit, but I'll answer your question
Okay.
now. So I'd say, basically, this is my business, and I travel around the world. I go to sustainability conferences and scientific conferences, and I'm always looking for, like you are, and, you know, we put out a newsletter. We want to give our people the facts, and we have a very bright community of newsletter subscribers out there like you do, and they'll call our bluff if we don't have the facts. So that's a high priority for us. And there are differing opinions about whether we're going to have fish in 30 or 40 years. Probably one of the world's foremost authorities is a fisheries research scientist at the University of Washington, Dr. Ray Hilborn. And he points out that there has been increasing concern about the ocean seafood sustainability. And right now we've probably got 30 different NGOs devoted to protecting the oceans, devoted to getting people to choose sustainable seafood. And if you actually look at the facts, a lot of fisheries are rebounding, a lot of fisheries are stabilizing. Now certainly there are areas in parts of the world where commercial interests have overcome political fisheries management. I mean, you look at countries off the coast of Africa that have basically given their fish resources away to the rich European nations so they can feed farm salmon, taking fish out of the mouths of their local populations and selling it to rich countries so they can. So there are areas that are problems. But I would point to 2 or 3 examples of where the ocean fisheries sustainability movement is really being, there's a lot of signs of success. Just last year, McDonald's in Europe decided to adopt, not that I'm advocating McDonald's, but this was
But they are a major supplier of food.
Yes, they are a major supplier of food.
Portion
and
of the population.
when they blink, you know, it has a big impact on the food supply chain. They came out in Europe and said they were only purchasing sustainably caught fish for their fish sandwiches. May not sound like that big of a deal. It's 100 million fish sandwiches a year. They're not going to get those from areas that are not being well managed. Basically, it's mostly the Alaskan pollock, which is a sustainable resource. Maersk, one of the biggest shipping lines in the world, has come out and said, we're not going to transport any fish that isn't sustainable. That, you know, those are just 2 of many, many examples I could give you where
Well, it's certainly encouraging.
where industry is, and it's all because of consumers demanding sustainable seafood. That's why what we do, this interview is so important. The best message I can give your viewers is pay attention to the fish you buy. You know, there are all kinds of seafood guides, environmental guides out there that will tell you which are sustainable, which are not.
Are there any general principles you can provide to help people differentiate between sustainable and non-sustainable fish or species?
Well, any Alaskan seafood is going to be sustainable because not that they don't have fluctuations in their resource, but in the years where the resources are down,
because of its management.
In the years where the resources are down, no fish will be caught. This year, the king salmon in Alaska are down, and so the fishery is shut down. The only fish that make it out onto the market through the Alaska are the ones that have been caught.
And from your 30 years of involvement with that industry, you have yet to see any blatant examples of corruption and conflict of interest which has overridden this management system? Because it's obviously a possibility. You could have the infrastructure in place to manage it, but it's easy to violate that.
Well, you always have the rogue fishermen who will go up.
But I'm talking about in
no, and it's
blatant abuses.
because not only do you have biologists that are basically waving the green flag and the checkered flag as to when you can go fishing, but you've got fisheries enforcement, basically a police force that's out on the water, and they're making sure that you know, if you're not supposed to fish here, you don't go there. And if you do, the fines are very steep. You can lose your boat, your fish, your right to fish.
Big risk.
Yeah,
big risk.
So
I think we've pretty well established with confidence that if you can identify authentic Alaskan fish, you're good to go.
That's
the
another-
challenge is, I would think, is that there's another huge potential for abuse on the certification of it, because you can easily slap a label on it and say it's Alaska, and it may not be Alaskan fish. So is that a possible, Billy? Is that happening?
I'm so glad you brought that up,
Yeah.
because
Consumer reports?
Consumer Reports,
Consumer
the New York
Union.
Times, there have been numerous investigations into the market.
It's somewhat similar to grass-fed beef, you know, which is absolutely, and even worse, natural. God, what an abused term. I mean, that thing, and hopefully the GMO legislation in California will resolve that, at least in California. But it's a term that is essentially meaningless, but has some high perceived value. Because
Well,
they twist it around. I mean, maybe they showed the fish a picture of Alaska and they can call it Alaska, and you know, in their minds they can justify that.
Well, the irony is that with the demand in sustainable fish, there's obviously more incentive for people to to be disingenuous, put it nicely. Both these two studies that were done in the last few years found 70 to 80% of the fish marked wild were actually farmed. So
Those are recent studies?
No, I think the one was in 2005, and there was another one in 2007 or 8, and I mean they're coming along fairly frequently, but it doesn't seem to be changing, and the reason is that it's hard to police. You've got thousands of stores across America, and I travel all over the country, and I'll often go into stores, and it's very common to see mislabeled fish.
So you've been doing this for a while. Do you have any tips or recommendations that you can guide consumers to choose an authentically harvested Alaskan fish?
Well, a couple things. One, you go into grocery stores, almost every grocery store will have canned salmon. And canned salmon is almost always Alaskan. There just aren't other sources of wild salmon. It's always wild and it's always Alaskan. Probably one of the best nutritional values in any supermarket.
The downside of any canned food, I mean, I wouldn't disagree with that.
The BPA issue.
The BPA, the phthalates, and BPS, and BPC, and BPT, you know, all the BPA family, you know, it's not the ideal method of containing that food.
Well, there are BPA-free.
Well, that's still abused too,
cans.
because they're BPA cousins.
Right.
That are just as dangerous, if not more dangerous. But
Right,
even though
right.
technically it's BPA free, it's these other these bisphenols that are
Well,
a challenge.
we can talk more about that later. It's the old risk-reward thing. And are you better off buying tuna helper in a cardboard box that doesn't have BPA? Is that going to, so it's,
Or-
none of us are getting out of here alive, right?
Yeah, that's true.
So anyway, and then when you go into restaurants, this is unbelievable. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've gone in and, oh yeah, it's wild. And you taste it and you know instantly, because that fat profile is so different that it's not.
We'll get back to that in a minute. There's a few
Yeah,
questions in it too.
Sure. But
So
I would say
it says
no-
on the menu Alaskan or wild Alaskan salmon, and you taste it. You
generally
know
it won't
instantly.
say Alaskan, because it'll just say wild. And,
Oh, so the term wild is more of an abused term than Alaskan,
Yes,
because it's
yes. Now
less
that's
likely to be prosecuted, I would assume.
it's easier to trace.
Yeah.
What I found, the simplest thing is just if you're in a store talking to the seafood clerk, or you're in a restaurant, your waiter, just ask them, where's the fish from? And if it's wild, they've paid more for it because they understand the value proposition. They brought it in because their customers want wild fish, so they should know where it's from. They should know it's a wild Alaskan sockeye salmon, or if they seem real hazy, they don't have answers for you, that's pretty
That's
much
a good
yellow
clue.
flag.
And then the other component too is just give us a perspective of what percentage of the fish, when you go to the grocery store or the supermarket, are farmed versus wild. I mean, is it the majority are farmed food? I know in restaurants it's like 95, 90%
Yes.
or
Yeah,
so.
I don't think it's too much different in grocery stores.
So it's the same ratio.
Now, if you go to stores that cater to,
specializing, right?
yeah, if you go to stores that cater to that serve sort of super health conscious clientele, then they are more likely to have wild salmon, because they're going to be demanding it, because they know the difference.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, ultimately, it's the educated consumer that can drive the market.
I would like to take just a minute and share this story that I have about this. I was in Fulton Fish Market in New York here a few years ago, and I walked in and I'm talking to the proprietor, whose grandfather started this 60 years earlier. And I look around, this is in November, so there are not a lot of fresh wild salmon around in November. And I see pallets and pallets of boxes stacked up, and on the end of each one it says wild king salmon. And I said, where are you getting all this wild king salmon this time of the year? And he says, without any guilt, hesitation, well, those are farmed wild king salmon. We sell 60,000 pounds a week. My customers won't pay for real wild salmon. And so we went back, we wrote a story in our newsletter, sent it out. A short time later, Marion Burroughs from the New York Times called me and she said, I saw your story. We've been thinking about doing this investigation. And that's what led to their investigation. They basically found that the 70 to 80% of the wild salmon was farmed. But he was shipping tens of thousands of pounds of that fish up and down the coast. Every chef, every seafood clerk, manager got that. It said wild king salmon on the end and put it out on his case as well. And coming from the fishing industry, having been a fisherman.
So the restaurant owner could be authentically sincere.
That's right. That's right.
And
but
actually
he
paying a higher
probably
premium.
knows that if he's only paying $3.75 a pound or what, what, that something's fishy here, right?
Okay.
But
and what is the price difference typically in a wild versus farm? Is it 20, 30, 40%, 50?
There's just a lot of different
Of
types.
the range.
I would say the average farm salmon is, I never buy it, so I'm not sure, but I would say probably $8 to $10 a pound.
Okay.
Wild salmon is going to be 15 to 20 on up, depending on what it is. But one thing that, as a fisherman, that there's the deception that's going on between the vendor and the customer. But the other things you may not think about is, okay, so I go into a store, I see this wild salmon, I buy it, I take it home, and it doesn't taste all that great. And I decide I don't like wild salmon. Boom, I'm done. I'm no longer a customer for legitimate wild salmon, which undermines my industry. And it does great long-term damage to that consumer, because all of a sudden now they're not going to eat something that's the best thing in the world they could be eating, or one of the best things. So there are a lot of victims in that scenario.
Are there any other tips that you'd have? Because then this is really a central core of this discussion, is to provide people, our viewers, with really some solid resources that they can differentiate. I mean, the price is probably one of the biggest, it would seem, because if you're paying below $10 a pound for at least salmon, you're unlikely to be getting the real deal, more than likely.
As is the case with so many things, know your vendor.
Right.
Buy your fish from somebody who knows fish, who you can trust, who you've known for a while, I mean, one of the things that we're proudest of is that we have all these endorsements from a lot of different people, because they know that what we are selling is, they're going to get what they're paying for. Right. It costs more because, for obvious reasons, but they can be sure that they're getting what they pay for. And if you have a local seafood vendor in the problem with most chain grocery stores, they're just, their seafood clerks are often not paid very well. They're not very well educated. They don't know the products. And so go to a seafood market, or go to somebody that's probably the safest way.
Okay.
And beyond that, sockeye salmon, which, as I mentioned, is our sort of signature product, cannot be farmed. And so if you find sockeye salmon, and it's very unique, it's bright red flesh, much redder than you'll see any farmed salmon. And so that's one way to tell. Okay.
Now let's go back to that, because of the nutritional characteristics. And the reason it's bright red is because of astaxanthin.
That's right.
Which is a major benefit, and actually it probably has one of the highest concentrations of foods that humans eat.
That's right. I know you're a big fan of astaxanthin.
I'm a phenomenal fan of it.
Sockeye salmon is your fish, because they, more than any other fish, contain astaxanthin. Now, farm salmon, as you probably heard, contain synthetic astaxanthin.
Yes. I just wanted you to expand on that, and that's pretty much universal. They're not going to be giving them regular, real astaxanthin.
That's right.
So I think it's the one derived from mushrooms, which is actually not approved for human use. But it's okay to feed it to fish that humans consume, and you've got to figure the validity of that type of logic.
Right, right.
It doesn't make sense. It's relatively irrational. But anyway, that's the reality. So farm salmon, from your understanding, is essentially all synthetic astaxanthin.
Yes, I had a scientist explain to me the difference between synthetic and natural astaxanthin, and he basically said that there are different isomers. So if you're a chemist, you understand this probably better than I do. But he said it's like when you have natural astaxanthin, you give it to that fish. It's like putting a right-hand glove on a right hand. But if you give it the synthetic astaxanthin, it's like trying to put a left-hand glove on your right hand. So the body just doesn't absorb it as efficiently.
Well, it can't use it, maybe not even absorb, but it can't be utilized. It can be absorbed and incorporated.
I read one,
but it won't work.
I read one study where there was...
It may even cause damage because it may prevent the naturally occurring one, or block receptor sites that it's supposed to benefit, so it can be highly counterproductive, not even just not ineffective, but cause damage.
So it's, I guess it's analogous to, salmon. So you can say, I want salmon for dinner, but there's a huge difference between wild salmon and farm salmon, as we've talked about. And the astaxanthin, it's the same thing. They will generally tell you it's, the same thing that's in the wild fish, but when you really look at it, it's not quite the same.
And another differentiation you alluded to earlier was the concentration of the fatty acids. One of the most important ratios, which is very difficult to do. We've been working on a simple test to offer people, but it's the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio. Generally, the ideal, at least from Paleolithic times, was considered to be anywhere from 1:1 to about 5:1, somewhere in that range, and it's disputable as to what is the ideal. But it's far different from what the current approach that the average American is consuming, which is about 20:1, and in some cases 50, 60, 70:1 of omega-6. Now, omega-6s aren't bad. We do need them. They are an essential part of the diet. We don't need them in levels that are 10, 20 times higher than they were supposed to be. And that's when it causes serious problems. And you say, what am I babbling on about this for? Well, the big issue is that if you're not, corn is not part of a fish's normal diet, and corn is loaded with these omega-6s. It doesn't have omega-3s. Omega-3s are in the weeds, the seafood that the fish eat. So you get this abnormal concentration. And I'm wondering if you could comment on some of this. I'm sure you probably looked at the studies that actually describe that and maybe expand on that concept. But that's the basic thing. I mean, you're not going to get the right types of fats.
Yeah, I didn't get into too many details when you're talking about nutrition, but that's a huge one.
Yeah.
Wild salmon typically has 600 to 1,000% more omega-3s compared to omega-6s.
Yeah.
So maybe a farm salmon is 1:1 omega-3s and 6s. Wild sockeye salmon is 6 to 9 to 1. So if you're trying to address that imbalance and you're trying to increase your omega-3s and get back closer to that 3:1 or whatever, you're not going to do it with farm salmon. You may
think you are, but you're not. You simply aren't.
Or you aren't going to do it as efficiently. And certainly these omega-6s are being, as you well know and probably have talked a lot about, are being linked to all manner of chronic diseases. And
it's not so much even the absolute value; it's the ratio. It's just this overabundance of the 6s. So and they're pervasive in processed foods, which is really one of the biggest culprits of the whole. That's really responsible for this whole mess.
One thing, a very good friend of mine is considered by some to be the world's foremost authority on fatty acids. And he approached us a couple of years ago and encouraged us to have one of these omega-3/6 tests because it seemed like such a natural fit with what we were selling. So I have read a lot and learned a lot about that whole issue. And people do want to strive for something close to even.
I'm a huge fan of technology, and I can't help but believe that there's some new tech advances, like maybe even apps for the iPad, the iPhone, or your Android smartphone or tablet that can help us identify these healthier choices, help us differentiate between the healthy versus the non-healthy seafood. So do you have any?
I'm so glad you asked. Yes, there's Monterey Bay Aquarium has a very good app that basically will give you the best choices, fish to avoid. You put it right on your smartphone, you go into the supermarket, you look at the species, you look it up, it'll tell you.
Interesting. So you'll know if it's sustainable at least.
That's right, yes.
Okay. And you just go to the App Store and type in Monterey Bay and it comes up?
I would Google it.
Google it first and then find
figure
out the name of the app.
I'm sure, and there's the Seafood Choices Alliance. There are a whole bunch of them. You could probably go to the App Store and search sustainable seafood.
Okay.
Or seafood, and I'm sure something would pop up.
Okay, great. That's
But,
another important resource because we really want to make those wise choices to encourage the market to move in that direction so that not only we, but our future generations will have access to this healthy type of food.
One other thing I wanted to mention is, as I mentioned earlier, there are more than 30 different environmental organizations focused on ocean sustainability. Probably the gold standard is the Marine Stewardship Council, MSC.org, and they are really they probably do the most robust science, put the most robust science into their certifications. We've been a member for over 10 years, and it's a lot of work on our end because you have strict chain of custody tracking. But like anything, you know, the validity comes from that.
You're MSC certified.
Yes. Now it's not a blanket certification; it's by species. So all of our Alaskan products are MSC certified. Our Canadian salmon is MSC certified, and even our salmon oil is MSC certified.
I believe the krill that we sell is also MSC certified.
That's right.
And people aren't aware of that. This is the most the gold standard of sustainability is this council.
Exactly.
And you know,
exactly.
you can't cheat that system. I mean, you can't pay anyone off to get this certification.
That's right. So it's a little blue logo, and just go to msc.org and learn more about it.
Okay,
So,
great. Now, another important component that I'd like to discuss, and I think you're really the ideal person for this, because you've studied it quite a bit, is the concern that most of the major waterways in the world are contaminated with mercury and other heavy metals and chemicals like dioxins and PCBs and other chemicals that wind up in the food supply. The mercury gets there. It's not commonly known, but the majority of the energy currently being produced in the United States is from burning coal. Coal is loaded with mercury. It basically is vaporized and goes into the air and then drops back down into the ocean and gets recycled into the food chain and bioaccumulates. The bigger the fish, like tuna, the more it has. A whale would be the ultimate. You know, that's why you don't want to be eating whale meat. Yeah, it's huge. They've been around for so long. They consume so many lower level creatures that it just bioaccumulates to very high concentrations. So I'm wondering if you can comment on the mercury issue. And I personally have had recently some tests done that very precisely differentiated between organic and inorganic mercury and identified that I was contaminated with mercury, surprise. And I'm actually currently finishing up a detox program for that. But the source of it was seafood. And my guess is, because we have previous discussions on this, is that that I was becoming a little careless in my selection of seafood, and actually the only seafood I would eat was from your company, the salmon, because we had tested it a number of times. And I still think that was the majority I was eating, but when I would go out to restaurants, I really, like most people, I really enjoy the taste of fish. And I think it is, no doubt in my mind, in an ideal circumstance, maybe 100, 200 years ago, certainly 200 years ago and before that, one of the finest foods on the entire planet, bar none. Absolutely. No question about it. But now you've got this industrial pollution issue that we have to contend with. And we have to, what is it? What is the ideal 21st century food? So those are the concerns that you know, knowledgeable people have. And I'm wondering if you could respond to that.
Love to respond to that. As I mentioned, you know, our customers are some of the most nutrition conscious people on the planet. And everybody's worried about methylmercury. Mercury is toxic at a certain dose. Right, and it's like so many things that it's like, well, anything. I mean, if you drink too much water, it will kill you. And you can go back 10,000 years and dig up specimens of people that lived near the water and ate a lot of seafood, and they have mercury in their hair. So mercury has always been in the marine environment. Half of what's there comes from underwater volcanic activity. Now, we have started burning coal last 100 to 200 years, and definitely it's added some, but it hasn't increased appreciably. Base levels haven't increased that much. But the point is that, you know, those fish, if you were eating fish 100 years ago, they would have mercury in them too. It's all about how much.
So you think the concentrations aren't significantly different in?
Well, certain areas, certainly, in industrial areas.
Like Bay or something where there's industrial pollution.
Well, a lot of people are use that as an example of,
Yeah.
That was such an off-the-charts anomaly, where the levels
Industrial
were
contamination.
hundreds and hundreds of times higher than you get in any fish, maybe even whale, I don't know. But because people in my company, my family, our families, we eat more of our seafood than anybody, this is a big issue, and so we've reached out, we've looked at the science, and really the science is that people that eat the most seafood, the populations around the world that eat the most seafood, are the healthiest. They're not falling over with toxins. People in Japan, including pregnant and nursing women, eat fish every day. They eat it twice a day many times. Yet they have much lower infant mortality rates. They have much higher longevity. They have some of the lowest rates of heart disease and cancer in the industrialized world. So if mercury in seafood was really that much of an issue, you wouldn't expect to find those things.
Well, it may not manifest in cardiac disease or even cancer, but it may be some autoimmune or degenerative diseases such as MS or...
Well, the bottom line is they live, if I'm going to be born anywhere, I'd like to be born somewhere where I have a high odds of surviving birth,
Sure.
which they do, and high odds of living a long, healthy, long life with very few diseases, which is...
All right, so you're...
But if I could just
Sure.
add to that, but all that aside, we could say that's anecdotal. If you look at the studies, first of all, if you weighed the studies, if you had a scale and you put all the studies that favor seafood consumption on one side and all the studies that point to mercury toxicity on the other from seafood, it would be so vastly out of, there are thousands of studies that show that people that eat seafood are healthier than people that eat a typical Western diet.
Yeah.
And
which
really
I think supports the benefit of getting animal-based omega-3s, not necessarily plant-based.
Yes, that's right. But really what it does is it begs the question, risk versus reward. Yes, there's going to be a trace level of methylmercury in seafood, or any food for that matter. Probably has, because now, as you know, we can test to parts per trillion. It's just vanishingly small amounts. And if you don't draw a line somewhere, you'd be afraid to eat anything.
And our body does have the capacity to detoxify this, and that's not a fancy woo-woo term. There are really specific biochemical mechanisms that have been around since we've evolved from whatever you believe, that actually are responsible for attaching, finding that ion, that mercury ion, and eliminating it from the body. It's just when you get, so we have the capacity to do that.
Yeah, there's a scientist named Nick Ralston. I don't know if you've read any of his work before, but he focused on the role of selenium in detoxifying methylmercury. Yeah, because they were trying to figure out.
It's a cofactor for glutathione that helps eliminate it, which has that methyl group from cysteine to actively bind to the mercury to excrete it.
The body uses selenium to make its own antioxidants. We
Sure.
don't get them all from food, right? So seafood is one of the best sources of selenium. So Dr. Ralston figured out that, he basically looked at the ratio of methylmercury, the molar ratio of methylmercury and selenium in different types of seafood, and he figured out pretty quickly that most fish have way more selenium in them than methylmercury. And the exception would be the large predatory fish that are high in mercury. And this explains why when they've done these studies, people that eat a lot of seafood aren't mercury toxic, because they're getting so much selenium that they're basically self-detoxifying.
That's interesting. And then, so that would, I guess the extension of that, it just didn't occur to me until you mentioned it, but these predatory fishes, which are eating other fishes, and these other fishes probably have eaten other fishes, so it just bioaccumulates up the food chain. You're far better off getting a vegetarian fish.
Eating toward the bottom.
The bottom.
Sardines, the anchovies, the salmon.
Well, smaller fish.
Yeah,
but even a larger fish like salmon, because I don't know, what's a big salmon? 20 pounds?
Well, like the sockeye salmon are 5 or 6 pounds, but the thing is, they don't live very long.
Right.
They have a
but
short
do they
life
eat
cycle.
other fish? Or
Sockeye salmon, like I said, eat at the very bottom. They're eating algae, krill.
Yeah,
You can't get a troll-caught.
They're essentially vegetarian fish.
Yeah, you can't get a troll-caught sockeye salmon because they don't feed on other fish. Maybe there's some exception, but
that's a very important distinction.
Yeah. So that's what Vital Choice has done.
Yeah.
That's how we address it. We only source fish that we know are the cleanest, eating at the bottom of the food chain. So and with other fish, we do have halibut, which can grow quite large. We have albacore tuna, which can grow quite large. What we do that's different is we do what you would do. When I go to down to meet the boat and buy the fish, they size grade them, and I say, I only want those, the smallest tuna. Or we only want the 20-pound and under halibut. Seriously, that's what we do. And it was interesting, the first time we did that with our tuna fishermen, I met him down at the dock, told him that we only wanted his smallest tuna, and he just shaking his head, he said, you know, all my years growing up with my dad on his boat and all my life fishing, they've always told us those were the trash. They wouldn't pay us anything for the little fish. Yet they had higher, we would later find, had higher omega-3 levels, more fat, healthy fat, and much lower contaminant levels. Now, they're much more expensive to process because you'd get a lot less meat off of a small fish than a big fish. But you know, our customers get the value proposition, and so they're willing to pay for that. And so that's what we do. Okay,
great. And just going back to the vegetarian salmon, the sockeye, are there other species that are like that too, or the other?
Yes, the pink salmon, or the pink salmon are only live 2 to 3 years, so they're even shorter lived. The flesh is quite different. It's not as firm, but you can find pink salmon in any grocery store. The canned again. The chum salmon, similar. It's really just the coho and the king salmon that tend to be to eat a little bit higher on the food chain.
Okay.
Yet their mercury levels are not significantly higher.
But they would be a bit higher because they're eating
a little bit higher
up the food chain.
But just to put it in perspective, one study that came out, I think in 2007, was published in The Lancet. It's the biggest, most robust study ever done on this topic of mercury in seafood. And the hypothesis when they started this study, it was called the ALSPAC study, Avon Longitudinal Study of Children, Moms and Children or something, ALSPAC. And they looked at 14,000 women and their kids. And they tracked them for over 10 years. I'm sure they're still tracking them. And the hypothesis was that the women who ate the most seafood would have kids that had the most developmental problems because of the higher mercury levels. When they finished the study, they discovered that it was exactly the opposite. It was the women that had eaten the most seafood had the children that had the least developmental challenges, whether you're looking at social skills, motor skills. The kids that were born to the moms that ate the most seafood had the highest IQ, had the highest social IQ. They looked at many different endpoints, and it was pretty dramatic, and it led them to conclude that guidelines such as the FDA was putting out at the time, and they've since changed it, but pregnant women should eat no more than 2 servings of fish per week. Well, they determined that women who were actually abiding by that recommendation or eating a number of the equivalent amount of fish were actually doing more harm than good. So the recommendation was actually harming the women, harming the children, so the FDA since raised to at least, it wasn't a major change, but they said at least 2 servings per week. And of course of certain species. There's 4 or 5.
So with no upper limit of restriction?
No, in fact the higher, the more the seafood, there was no upper limit. The more seafood the pregnant women ate, the better the outcome for the children. And this was, you know, a rigorous study. Gene Golding, Joe Hiblin from the National Institutes of Health.
And was there still an exclusion of the traditionally recognized fish that are higher in mercury, such as tuna?
You know, this was in the UK. I don't know what they were. I doubt that they were. It was just general seafood consumption. Okay. Whatever the common species are. Probably a lot of herring and cod and the other thing, just again back to the sort of the governmental guidelines on mercury consumption. It was interesting for me to learn that those are based on a study that was done for the most part, based on a study that was done in the Faroe Islands. That showed there was some relationship between seafood consumption and abnormal outcomes in children. But when you really look at that, the seafood they were eating was pilot whale. And many times they were eating
one of the highest concentrations in the world of mercury.
And so when they started trying to figure out a guideline level, safe guideline level for mercury consumption, they looked around and they couldn't find any science saying that there's a problem with it until they went there, and so that's what they use.
You know, it somewhat reminds me of that story that you just shared about the vitamin D. the concern for vitamin D toxicity, and really which was largely responsible for limiting the RDAs to the absurd level of 400 units a day, which is almost absolutely useless, was based on a study done in India for like with 3 or 4 people, and I forget the specific details, but it's absolutely absurd. It was absolute, and everyone it just continued for decades, and they all relied on this one useless study. When the reality, if you go all the way back and check the details, it never panned out. So it kind of reminds me of that. It just, gosh, you know. So what is the basis of their concern?
So in the Alspec study, the conclusion was, okay, there may be some adverse impact of the mercury, but it's vastly outweighed by the benefit. And so, and also it's worth mentioning, as you as a doctor know, that everybody's different. And some people don't process, you know, methylmercury the same way, or anything. You know, there's a whole bell curve of the way people process these contaminants. But in general, it looks like most of the world's population processes seafood in a way that benefits them, and it's not detrimental. We talked a lot about mercury in seafood and other contaminants. One issue that's come up in the last couple of years is radiation. Since the disaster in Japan, the nuclear meltdown, and a lot of people are concerned about radiation in seafood. And we get a lot of customers inquiring. There's a lot of sort of sensational headlines out there, and people really want to know if their seafood is safe. And we want to know. So what we did is we took 16 different species that we sell. We went out and found what we felt was the most credible lab that tests food for radiation. And fortunately, it all came back clean. There's a scale, becquerels per kilogram, that is used. And just to put things in perspective, a granite countertop has 1,000 becquerels per kilogram. The EPA level for drinking water is 750 becquerels per kilogram. All of our seafood, most of the seafood came back with 0 becquerels. And the only 2 exceptions were our tuna and halibut that came back with 1.4, 1.5 becquerels per kilogram. So essentially, you know, all of our Alaskan seafood, Pacific Northwest seafood had, I think, extremely safe, in many cases, no radiation detected. And that's a program we intend to continue with. In fact, we've got more. That was taken. Those tests were taken about a year ago, and we have samples out now, so we'll be reporting those results. But listening to the scientists who are supposed to know the most about this, we feel that our seafood continues to be safe. We want to validate that for our customers, so we brought in this independent lab to do the testing. So we're really, as I said earlier, our families consume more of our seafood than anybody. And so, and of course, we feel a strong obligation to our customers to give them the cleanest, purest possible seafood. So this is just another way that we do it.
So recently, one of our staff members accompanied you on a trip to Alaska to view some of the fisheries and some of the beautiful environment up in Alaska this past summer. So I'm wondering if you can comment and maybe briefly describe the process, because it was really astonishing to me as my staff member had commented on this whole process on how you harvest these fish and take out the eggs and you inseminate them, and then you actually sort of repopulate these fisheries with these eggs. So if you can expand it, because it really, I'm sure most people watching this have no idea this is going on.
Yeah, in some areas of southeast Alaska, there are hatcheries where they will do as you described. The fish will come back in. It's basically just a way of enhancing the fisheries return. It's much different than salmon farming. Salmon farming, those fish are enclosed in that pen their entire life, eating, you know, whatever it is they're fed their entire life, and versus this, they call it ocean ranching in Alaska, where the wild salmon come back. And they will take a few of them, a relatively few of them, and they will take the eggs out and fertilize them, and then raise them until they're just little fingerlings, and then release them into the ocean. Now, it's important to note that these hatcheries are placed away from wild, truly wild spawning habitats, so that these fish are not going to come back and go up and mix in with the wild fisheries.
Oh, interesting.
And
how many do they grow up? I mean,
Pardon?
Is it millions that they do?
uh,
Hundreds of thousands?
I think the Alaska salmon harvest is up to 140 or 50 million this year, and probably 40% of that.
Well, in the hatcheries, how many do they grow in the hatcheries?
I'm not sure, honestly.
Okay.
I'd have
But
to
it's probably
check
a few
into that.
millions.
Oh, several million, several
Okay.
million. There are numerous hatcheries, but most of it is pink salmon and chum salmon,
Okay.
and neither of which we sell.
Okay.
There are a few sockeye hatcheries, but
I would imagine pink salmon has less esthethan because it's pink,
yeah,
not red.
yeah, nothing compares to sockeye. Some of the king salmon or silver salmon will have more, but
So, go ahead.
but anyway, it is a remarkable thing to watch. Now, this is, in my opinion, we could talk about aquaculture, and I think it's really important to distinguish between sustainable aquaculture and non-sustainable
Or
aquaculture.
traditionally viewed farming.
Right, salmon farming, fish farming.
Can you also comment on some of the other adverse consequences to the ecosystem that traditional farming, fish farming has?
Adverse consequences of fish farming?
Yes.
I would say specifically salmon farming.
Okay.
Because there's a vast amount of aquaculture around the world, shellfish. That's all positive. We need more of that.
Okay.
And I think that's
Thank
our
you
future.
for differentiating that.
Yeah, sea vegetable farming. My goodness, the rich source of nutrients, unbelievable source. Kelp, seaweed. We need more of that, and so I don't want to get labeled as somebody who's anti-fish farming. I'm not at all. I'm a big fan of aquaculture. It's the unsustainable forms of aquaculture that are problematic, and it's only when consumers demand sustainable aquaculture that we're going to start seeing it, because it costs more to farm salmon in a sustainable manner. You've got to take them out of the water and put them in closed containment pens on the shore, but now you've got power to run the pumps, and it's just it isolates them from the marine ecosystem, which is a good thing, but you've got to pay for it. Right now, the marine ecosystem is subsidizing farm salmon. That's why it's cheaper, because the farmers don't have to pay to get rid of all the waste. And so
one of our big initiatives is the California Ballot Initiative to help people have the right to choose whether or not they're going to be consuming genetically engineered foods. So I'm wondering if you can give us an update on the genetically engineered salmon, if that's been approved, if it's implemented, or what the status is.
they've been working on it for, I think, at least 10 years now, and it was getting pretty close to being approved here in the last year or two. And as you probably saw, there was a huge hue and cry against it. And so as far as I know, it doesn't look like there's going to be much demand for it. Now, whether and GMOs in general is a huge topic these days, which you are helping to educate people about. And I think it's just one more of those.
Well, and one of the dangers, as I understand it, is that with fish farming is that there's the risk that these containment systems are going to fail.
They do all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, all they are is net pens out in the water, and so a sea lion or something.
So it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when.
Well, it's how often, really.
Even worse.
Because they do. I mean, millions of over the last 10 years, there have probably been over 1 million farm salmon that have escaped into the wild to compete against the wild fish. And
do they compete effectively?
I don't think it. I don't have any evidence of that.
Well,
I did see information one time that they were populating local streams, and but I would refer you back to the Farmed and Dangerous website, because there's a lot of information there.
But that would be the concern with these genetically engineered salmon that are just monsters.
Supposedly,
and they're going to farm them, and then they're delusional to think they're not going to escape, and then start populating the entire ecosystem out there.
Supposedly, they're
sterile?
Sterile.
Oh, okay.
That's what they're saying.
Yeah.
But supposedly, mine tailings aren't going to leak into the environment. But I mean, it's pretty hard put your faith in.
Now, one of the statements that you're known for is that the best way to save wild, truly authentic wild salmon is to eat it. And I wonder if you can expand on that logic.
Sure. Yeah, that seems counterintuitive. But basically, if you go back to where we started, where I talked about how farm salmon was undermining our industry, and myself and a lot of other people had to get out of fishing because we couldn't afford to stay in it. And all those communities in Alaska that rely on salmon fishing for revenue had to go find something else to do. So now you've got mining interests, oil drilling interests, tourism, all taking the place, filling in where the fisheries resource used to supply revenue for those people, but none of those alternatives are benefit the salmon habitat. One example, I used to fish out of Ketchikan, Alaska. Sleepy little fishing town. I'd go up there every year, go catch herring, and salmon as well. And as the fishing industry collapsed, they started courting the tourism industry. Now you can go up there, and it's not unusual to see 4 or 5 mega cruise ships tied up off of Ketchikan. Now those can't be good for the salmon habitat, but the bottom line is the fishing industry is the biggest advocate for wild salmon. Our lives depend on those runs coming back. If anybody gets in their way, we're going to stand up and fight the oil interest. Chevron wanted to buy leases in Bristol Bay, and just as an example.
There's an accident waiting to happen.
Now what's going on right now, and I'll tell you more about this later, and I've got some other information, but there's a gigantic mining interest that's trying to put a large open pit mine at the headwaters of Bristol Bay. Now you've got these 300 meals worth of salmon, just nature delivers
300
on
million.
30 million salmon times 10 meals.
Yeah, 300 million.
Meals, just nature delivers on our doorstep. All we have to do is protect the habitat, and there they are. We don't feed them, we don't do anything other than catch them and ship them to people's door. And yet this mining interest is coming in. The Pebble Mine, your viewers want to look it up, just Pebble Mine, Google Pebble Mine. This is going to be one of the largest open pit mines in the world at the very headwaters of Bristol Bay, Alaska, geologically.
It's already approved?
No. It's well along in the permitting process. Right now it's the EPA that is kind of standing in the way in the Clean Water Act. And it just remains to be seen. It's so valuable, potentially. All the minerals in the ground are worth billions and billions of dollars. But who's standing, who are the lead?
The fishermen.
It's the fishermen. So if you don't buy wild salmon, those fishermen don't have a job, and they've got to go somewhere else. And all of a sudden, the barriers to those outside interests that are not worried about saving salmon are going to go away. So that's what I mean by you want to eat wild salmon, you want to save wild salmon, you need to eat it.
Now, you obviously provide salmon commercially to consumers, direct to consumers, so people can go to your website and purchase this salmon, this phenomenally healthful, pretty much guaranteed authentic. There's no possibility that you're going to get something that's not being claimed. You'd be out of business otherwise.
No,
and there's just too much risk for you.
This is more than a business for me.
It's a passion, so there's no way you're going to be doing that. So you're going to get the real deal if you order from your company. But do you sell to big commercial interests like food chain stores like Whole Foods?
I get asked that a lot, and we don't. And
you don't.
Here's the reason.
What's the reason? You can't produce the quantity they require.
Because I'm a seafood snob. I grew up in that industry.
Okay.
I pride myself on giving people the very best. And frankly, it's not all. I mean, just because it's wild, just because it's from Alaska, it may be very nutritious. It's going to be sustainable, but there are different ways of harvesting, different ways of processing.
It's a very important point. So why don't you differentiate those and help our viewers understand the difference between salmon provided by you versus another authentic wild Alaskan salmon that might be sold at Whole Foods?
Well, first of all, when the salmon come back from the ocean, they come back over a period of time. And when they first come back, generally, they're bright, vigorous, beautiful skin. They're just prime. They're ready to go up those rivers.
Like a young athlete.
Exactly. I mean, one other huge difference between wild and farm salmon is wild salmon is subject to the laws of nature. It's out there in the ocean trying to avoid being eaten every day of its life. If it's sick, if it's weak, it's called out. It never
Nature
makes
takes
it
care
back.
of it. Yeah.
So when it does get back, those are all the prime, the very best fish. And as the time goes on, then the laggards start coming back.
Let me just interrupt you for a moment, just
Sure.
because of personal ignorance and curiosity. At what stage in their life do they come back? How old are they when they return?
It depends on the species, but on average 4 years.
Okay.
So talk a long time about the different types of fish and different life cycles. But in general, the sockeye salmon come back after 4 years. Some come after 3, some come 5. It's sort of nature's insurance policy. But later, as the season goes on and more fish come back, or maybe they come back and they've been milling around near the river mouths for a while, and their skin starts darkening. What happens when those salmon go upstream is they stop eating. Basically, there's not enough food in the rivers for them, so they don't feed. So when they come back from the ocean, they have to be packing the calories they're going to need to get to the spawning grounds. Now, is the spawning grounds 50 miles up the river? Is it 1,000 miles up the river? That's going to have a huge impact on the fat in that fish in that particular river.
Sure.
So what we do is we go to rivers where they have a long ways to go, so they're much richer, fatter, they're much fattier, and so they have a lot more
Otherwise,
flavor.
they'd never make it.
But those, that's right. Maybe you've heard of Copper River king salmon.
No, I
Or
haven't.
Copper River salmon. Copper River is in the Prince William Sound area of Alaska. It's unique in that it's a rapidly flowing, rapidly dropping, rapidly flowing river. It's fed by glaciers. It's icy cold. Those salmon coming back to that river have to navigate, 7-knot currents to get up where they're going, and requires a lot of energy. So Copper River salmon have probably some of the highest fat levels, and again.
Do you harvest from that river?
There's so much demand for those fish. They're the most expensive fish you'll see. When you see $40, $50 a pound
That is
fish.
sort of the
But because the connoisseurs, they want that, and all over the world. And there's only a few amount. I can tell you more about that later, because this year we did sell some, and it was pretty amazing what happened. But anyway, so as those fish come back, some are milling, some go straight up the river, some are milling around, and when they stop feeding, basically they start living on their resources. And the interesting thing about sockeye, when they start living off the resource, what happens to that astaxanthin? It migrates into the skin, so they'll start turning blush. And the further upriver they go, by the time they get up the spawning grounds, their body is the color of your tie. That's what, they're known as red salmon. You may have seen pictures of them. Point being that all those nutrients are being burned, and there's less in the flesh. So you don't want fish once they've hit the river. I mean, there's still some amount of nutrition there, and there are markets for every type of fish, every grade of fish. We've opted to focus on the prime, the sort of tip of the pinnacle of quality. Now, back to your original question, Whole Foods, Kroger's, grocery stores across America, even if they want wild salmon, they're not going to pay this because they're so price sensitive. They're going to buy this one or this one or this one. And I've seen all of them in the supermarkets. And most consumers don't really know the difference. So why would I pay $15 a pound when I can get wild salmon for $10 a pound? But I want to emphasize that if it's wild, it's from Alaska, it's going to be good nutrition. It's just on a scale. Where is it? And
is taste and flavor an issue too as you get the higher quality salmon?
Definitely. So
And are there any recommendations that you'd have or guidelines that you can provide people to know or how to differentiate the quality just by the flavor?
I have to be careful here because some of most of the salmon that you find in the grocery store that's from Alaska, fantastic nutrition. I would not discourage you from buying whatever you can afford. If you want to spend more to get the very best, it's there. That's what we offer. But I wouldn't discourage you if you go into a Safeway and you see a Alaskan salmon, and you're convinced it's Alaska salmon, it may be not be a troll caught, prime fish, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't. You should be discouraged.
What do you mean by troll caught prime?
Oh, it's a fishing method, basically one at a time,
Oh.
hook and line, brought aboard.
Is that the way you use it in your company?
Our king salmon or silver salmon are troll caught. Yeah,
Okay.
it's the best
Is,
way.
and that's the highest quality salmon you typically provide, other than the Copper River salmon that you have occasionally?
Well, okay, we sell sockeye salmon, king salmon, silver salmon.
Okay.
The king and the silver salmon are troll caught. Sockeye salmon, remember we talked earlier how they're
There's so many of
vegetarians
them.
basically,
Yeah.
and they don't eat, so they won't hit a lure, so you can't
Okay.
catch them.
Oh.
Generally, you can't catch them.
Okay.
And so those are net caught.
Okay.
But they're, so the river system puts its imprint on the
Mhm.
quality of the fish. The fishing method.
And the flavor too, I'd imagine.
Fat and flavor go hand in hand.
Mhm.
The more fat, the more flavor, the better the texture, the mouthfeel, and all of that. But another huge factor is how is the fish caught. Now in Bristol Bay, you have millions and millions of these salmon coming back. It's like this incredible natural miracle, of these fish coming back
Mhm.
every year. But at the peak of the season, that can be hard for industry to keep up with. Like I said, you remember that one year,
Mhm.
we had 20 million fish come back just to our river. And there's no way you could stop them all. Your nets fill up, you get them on board the boat, and they're not going to be handled as well, just by nature of the fishery.
Yeah.
They're not going to be handled as well as the fish that are caught one at a time. Or if you go to get sockeye in another part of the state where the volume is much lower, they're handled better. They go through the processing sort of pipeline a lot faster. And so they're going to emerge on the other side in better shape. Every time you touch that fish, they're incredibly delicate. And every time you touch them, the quality doesn't get any better. We say that fresh caught salmon is like a melting ice cube. The quality, as far as the quality, it degrades quickly. So what we do is we buy the best fish, process them, flash freeze them, vacuum seal them, and basically locks in that quality level at that point. And we maintain that until we deliver it to people. So when they thaw it out, they're going to get basically the quality grade that came out of the water. As opposed to when the supermarket gets it, if it's frozen, they'll thaw it out, they'll put it out on ice. Ice cube starts melting again. Mm-hmm. And those incredible polyunsaturated fats that are one of the big reasons we all eat seafood, as you know, are really unstable. And so they'll tend to oxidize. And that's when you end up with fish that doesn't taste too good.
It doesn't smell too good either.
That's right. That's right.
So that's terrific. So do you have any tips, I guess, for people who would be interested in purchasing products from you, or any other vendor really that's going to provide high quality? One of the things because I've done this in the past, and it seems just from a non-wasteful, optimized efficiency perspective, to maybe purchase a few months' supply at once, because shipping is a big expense in this equation. If you're purchasing a few, you're going to pay more for shipping than you are for the product.
Yeah,
so the higher the volume, the lower that you're going to pay, the lower shipping you'll pay per piece of fish.
Yeah, we offer most of our products in 3 different sizes. So, and we encourage people to buy the larger sizes if they want to share with their neighbors or other family members.
So actually the size of the fish that you ship
No, the
to.
pieces are the same. It's just
Okay.
the packages.
Okay,
So
packages,
you could buy 6 pieces if you want to try it out.
Mhm.
Buy 12 pieces or 24 pieces, and of course the bigger packages are lower cost per pound.
Mhm.
And then we offer free shipping on anything over $99. So
Okay.
that gets you over that threshold.
Okay,
And then
interesting.
the other thing is we basically take all the risk out of it by giving a 100% satisfaction guarantee.
Yeah.
And because we would go broke quickly if people started calling us on that, that's another reason that we
Yeah.
think it's worth it to
That's
buy
a
the
very
best.
powerful guarantee, and I've been very impressed with you because we've known each other for 10 years, pretty much since you've been in business, I think, or close to it. And I've always been impressed with your ability to stand behind your product and to really be an educator about this whole the process that you're doing in sustainable fishing, and you're really a leader in the field in that perspective, and really providing a product that, how much better of a guarantee can you provide than that? To say if you do if you don't like it, you get your money back. You don't even have to send it back because obviously it'd be crazy.
Yeah.
So
I think many people are so delighted and amazed that it does taste good. It isn't like anything they've ever had before. I met a woman here not too long ago that approached our booth, and we were doing demos at a conference, and she turned up her nose and she said, "I haven't eaten salmon in 37 years. I'm not about to start now." I said, "Well, maybe you've just never tasted good salmon," because a lot of people think that they don't like salmon or they don't like seafood, and it's because there's a lot of bad seafood out there.
And maybe would you say the majority would be fair to say? Of salmon,
I don't
at
want to
least.
say, but there's a lot of fish out there that
there's
doesn't
how many
taste
more
good.
people that would know better than you? I mean, you know
I
them.
try. I will always, whenever I travel, I always will try the fish just to see, and it's disappointing most of the time, I would say.
Okay.
Not always, but so the people that have had a bad experience, that's one of the real crimes of selling bad fish, is you turn people off to seafood. So this woman approached and she said, she just wouldn't eat seafood. I said, "Well, maybe you've never had good salmon." And I said, I opened up my wallet, I put a $5 bill down on the table, and I said, "I'll give you $5 if you try my salmon and you don't like it." And her husband looked at me like, "Buddy, you just lost $5. She won't even eat my fish when I bring it in off the boat." I said, "Well, just try it." So I put a little piece in the cup and handed it to her, and she chased it around for a minute or so, and finally she looked at the $5 and she stuck it in her mouth, and she goes, "Wow, that tastes like chicken." Which I don't know why I guess that was the closest protein she'd had to.
Yeah.
Anyway, and then she asked for more, and she stood there at my booth for 30 minutes telling people about, "You've got to try this. I didn't think I liked fish," and
She was
we
a
have
convert, a
thousands
new
of
convert.
yes, we have. That's one of the happiest moments of my life when we enlighten people that if you think you don't like seafood, maybe you just haven't had good seafood, because and it's worth trying because it's so phenomenally good for you.
Yeah, it is. There's no question it's one of the healthiest foods on the planet. Assuming you could address the toxicity issue, and you commented on that earlier. I'm wondering, though, sort of another level of insurance in your review and experience in this, if there's any strategies that you've become aware of that have been particularly effective to mitigate against the potential danger. And I could think of one would be swallowing some chlorella shortly after you ate it, because the chlorella will bind, as well as the fish is still in your gut, to the mercury there, and you won't absorb it. It'll just excrete it in the stool. So do you have any thoughts on that? Because this is a big
I've got to
area
give
for
you an anecdote, and
Sure.
here's the anecdote. I've been a fisherman for 30 years, and I'd say for the last half of that, I eat fish every day.
Mhm.
I've been tested for methylmercury. It's not, it's probably the high side of normal,
Mhm.
because I'm traveling with pouches of our tuna.
Sure.
And I've watched people around me. My wife had, she's going to kill me for saying this, she had several medical conditions, chronic medical conditions, that the doctors had told her were genetic. That there was not. She had terrible allergies.
Mhm.
She had the what they call chicken skin. The like.
Atopic dermatitis, eczema.
Doctors told her there was nothing they could do about it. It's genetic. When we started the company, started getting educated, started eating more fish, started lowering those pro-inflammatory omega-6s, because that's equal part of the equation, right?
Mhm.
All of that cleared up. And other things I won't go into now. It was dramatic, the improvements in health. And so I think that maybe the stress from worrying about contaminants exceeds, the benefit. If you're worried about it, if you may be one of those people that don't process mercury correctly, then you have to be careful. You have to take some measures, maybe the chlorella or cilantro or whatever. But I think my impression, and I'm not a scientist or a doctor, I hang out with lots of them,
Mhm.
but my impression after 10 years is that just choose clean seafood species. They're rich in all these micronutrients that boost our immune system, make our cells healthier, make every part of our body healthier, and you're going to be way better off than if you avoid it.
Sure. Well, you've provided us with loads of solid information and useful tips and resources and strategies that we can incorporate to eat healthy and continue to avoid diseases using food as one of our primary tools, because that's really 80% of our health comes from the food that we eat. So are there any other issues or items you'd like to discuss or mention?
just
Expand
just
on.
reiterating choose sustainable seafood. You can go to our website. We have a great page. We have a tremendous amount of information
And
on
that
our
website name is?
It's vitalchoice.com.
Okay.
And we have lots of 24/7 customer service. If you have any questions, you feel free to call us.
Money back guarantee.
Money back guarantee, and it's all good. And probably the biggest thing is we also have the omega-3 and 6 test that you want to get those tissue levels. Whether you're eating our fish or somebody else's, it's important to not only, and this goes to your question earlier about sustainability and the fish resources. Dr. Joe Hiblin at NIH makes the point, if you lower the 6s, you don't need as many omega-3s. It's about the tissue levels.
Sure, it's the ratio. It's the ratio.
He did a study looking at around different countries around the world, and in the Philippines you need maybe 3 grams a day to get to an ideal ratio because they eat a lot of fish. In the UK you need 20 grams a day to, and I'm not sure about the numbers, but in the US you need like 30 grams of fish oil a day just to balance all those omega-6s, the huge amount of omega-6s. Well, obviously if you eat fewer omega-6s, fewer processed foods, you don't need as much fish. If you eat more of the vegetable omega-3s, the leafy greens and walnuts and flax, all of that will help balance that ratio.
Sure.
But it's
Yeah, and I'd just like to emphasize one point you didn't necessarily in concluding is the sustainability issue. And that by choosing to consciously seek out certified wild, truly wild, authentic Alaskan fish or salmon specifically, you are actually making a positive move at sustaining that, because this is a well-documented, virtually no room for corruption, elegantly managed harvesting system that's absolutely sustainable.
Yes.
Because if it's not, then the industry disappears. So by seeking to purchase that on a regular basis, you are actually creating more demand for that, giving those fishermen more ability to resist potential threats to that environment. So
the other thing
it's
is
good for everyone.
Yes, and the other part of that equation is you're taking pressure off the non-sustainable species so that they can rebuild. You know, if you tell your grocer, I only want you to buy fish from the
Very
green
good
list,
point. Yeah, that's the converse of this.
then they'll
yeah.
stop buying those, and the shipping lines will quit shipping them. The stores will quit stocking them, and then they can rebound. Because we do know how to manage fisheries sustainably, and the bottom line is that there'll be increasing demand for those sustainable species. So the price will continue to go up, but you have to look at the whole picture, the whole value proposition.
Sure.
It's one of the last truly wild, naturally organic foods on Earth, and you should expect to pay more for it.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I really thank you for coming to Chicago to educate us, and me specifically. I feel so grateful to have this opportunity to be educated and learn stuff all the time, new information that really is going to help our viewers certainly, but me also, because it really helped modify my impression on some of these important issues. So I appreciate that, and thank you for all you're doing and being such an important resource for people to provide them with a source of food that's going to make them healthy.
Thank you,
and
Dr.
keep the
Mercola.
environment healthy.
Thank you, Dr. Mercola. Well, and I appreciate you helping us get the message out.
Thanks so much for watching. Remember, hit the like and subscribe button so you can get more videos that can help you and your family take control of your health.